Welcome to this Idaho Reports Web Extra. Joining us today, we have Bill Dentzer from the Idaho Statesman, and as always, Dr. Jim Weatherby and Betsy Russell from the Spokesman-Review. So, Betsy and Bill, you were both at the Tax Ad Hoc Working Group meeting on Tuesday. What was the big bombshell, Betsy? What stood out to you most?
It was what our State Commerce Director, Jeff Sayer, had to say. And he was invited to give a presentation on what do businesses, large and small businesses, want from our tax system? What should we consider changing? And his message was very, very surprising to the legislators. What he said was, don't cut taxes. Instead, invest in a talented workforce. And under some questioning, he said he still believes lower taxes are good and we probably should cut taxes at some point, but not now, because the real pressing need is to invest in a talented workforce in Idaho. That's what companies are looking for, and that, not tax rates, will determine whether they relocate or expand to Idaho.
And this is a big pivot from where he was before, because I know in 2012 he was really pushing a big tax cut for the top income tax earners and the corporate tax rate, pushing a big tax cut that was controversial at the time. How important is this pivot, Jim?
I'm surprised by it, and would also point out the importance of having open public meetings. That we heard this, and this is being reported around the state. But we've heard in hearing after hearing from so many groups who have come to ask for tax cuts, have always focused on tax policy first as very important in terms of encouraging businesses to come to Idaho or to expand in Idaho. For the director of the Department of Commerce, even though he's a short timer now, to stand up and talk about the importance of talent, the importance of infrastructure and funding in that, and not moving even in an election year for a tax cut, I think is very important. And I'm interested with Betsy, a bombshell. How did the legislators respond? Or was there any particular reaction that stood out?
I did talk with some of the legislators afterwards. One of the co-chairmen of the committee, Representative Gary Collins, said he suspected he would say something like that. He'd been talking with him. I spoke with Senator Steve Vick, and he was quite taken aback. He said, well, all I can say is that he's sure changed his tune, and I'll just leave it at that. And Senator Vick that day was advocating completely doing away with our personal income tax in Idaho, that's the step this committee should be taking. And Senator Jeff Sidaway, the Senate tax chairman, had opened the meeting by saying, well, we've been talking about whether we need to get our top rate down below 7%, our top personal income tax rate. It's now 7.4%. I think it was quite a surprise, and I think that it will affect the discussions. Some of the proposals that this committee has been kicking around are talking about things like reforming the tax system, perhaps trying to get that top rate down by flattening it out, but maybe not generating any more money. Of course, the downside of that is people in the middle would pay more. Is our tax system too complex? Are there ways about it to be simplified? What about our sales tax? What about internet sales? And so the door has kind of been thrown open to what kind of improvements could be made in the tax system, but tax cutting may not be the top priority.
When he says investing in a workforce, what does he mean by that? Is it all education, or?
Well, it's not just all education. I do want to say that Sarah said at one point that essentially acknowledging this might exactly make your jaws drop, but this is what he was saying is that the pace of change has been so rapid that what they're hearing back now from businesses is basically their businesses are saying we are not expanding anymore because we don't have the capacity, because we don't have the talent to do so. So I think what he's talking about is not necessarily doing much to change taxes, but to take whatever money is available and invest it back into job training, job creation. It's kind of like if you build it, they will come. If employers see that there's a ready pool of applicants to apply for these not entry-level jobs in the state, that will encourage them to move in, and then the increase in business activity will raise the prosperity for everyone is the argument.
I'm waiting with bated breath for the governor's State of the State and budget message in terms of, is this a change within the governor's office, or is this Sayer speaking for himself on his way out the door in terms of their attitude toward this 2016 legislative session and where the priorities will be, if any, for tax cutting?
Now, Governor Otter has long said that education funding is his top priority, particularly restoring that after the cuts during the recession. But what Jeff Sayer told that committee was that he wasn't talking about just a boost in public school funding. That's not what he's talking about doing with this money. He's talking about very specific targeted investments to provide the kind of training that'll create the workers that industry specifically needs. And he gave a concrete example, and that's the computer science department at Boise State University. They used to only graduate 25 students a year. They've had some recent investments to bring it up to 50. This year, the legislature approved their request to try to get it up to 100. He said there are companies in Silicon Valley that are not calling the Department of Commerce, that are calling the Boise State University Computer Science Department saying, when you get up to 100, we could look at coming there.
Now, all of that said, first of all, investing in higher education and talent pipelines isn't mutually exclusive with lowering taxes. But as you mentioned, Jim, he's a short timer. He's on his way out. He's announced he's resigning. And I'm talking, of course, about Jeff Sayer. So what he said on Tuesday, is it even going to matter when a new Department of Commerce is appointed and the legislature comes together in 2016?
It does matter if it's a change of attitude in the governor's office, or is it just Jeff Sayers speaking for himself? Though I think he spoke very clearly, and as I recall, and I would think it was in your report, Betsy, that he said that no business group that he had talked to was interested in coming to Idaho or expanding, had even talked about the tax rates.
Had even mentioned tax rates.
Right.
He said that very specifically. And I do think that even if it is just Jeff Sayer on the way out the door, I think he's garnered a lot of respect from legislators because he came from the private sector. He's an entrepreneur. He came from business. And the reason he's leaving is he's going back there. And so I do think that they'll pay attention to what he says.
And I want to also highlight the presentation after Jeff Sayer was a legislative budget analyst going over some very startling figures about where Idaho now sits in the state tax structure nationwide. And Idaho is 41st out of 50 states in terms of the overall tax burden as a percentage of personal income, which means it's numerically may be different, but in terms of how it affects the average person, we're low. And the only place where we're not low is on fuel tax, which makes sense because of if personal income is low and that tax is higher, it's going to register higher in the ratings.
And those same numbers, if they're looked at per capita, Idaho's 49th for total tax burden.
So and Idaho is maybe 49th in terms of total state and local spending as well.
Actually, I think we were 51st on that one.
That's right, we were 51st.
That was actually
we exceeded Mississippi on that one.
That was an interesting bit of information that came out as a result of a request from one legislator on the committee, Representative Robert Anderst, who asked the legislative budget staff to research this for him. He said, well, what about the other side of this? What about spending? How do we compare with other states on state and local government spending? And we are last, and not just last, but last by a long shot.
I amend my comment.
It always goes back to funding, I guess, how much money we spend, and it comes back to that old adage, if we spend money, we're going to make money. But I guess at the end of the day, what's the point that this committee goes home with? They were given homework.
Well, the other co-chairman, Senator Sidaway, said after that he tends to side against with the side that says no drastic tax cuts to preserve this. But his and he repeated this a couple times at the hearing, his main interest is to simplify the tax code. And there are a lot of deductions and exemptions in the sales tax, for instance, that I think this committee is going to look at taking out to make it, to simplify it. And perhaps, I mean, Sarah did talk about potentially changing the income tax code. He called the brackets completely irrelevant, or completely useless, the tax brackets, the personal tax brackets. So, and he suggested there's a way to reconfigure that to lower taxes but broaden the base so everyone is paying less. I'm not sure how the math works yet. That's the next interview. But so I think we're going to see a more complicated discussion of taxes, not a slash and burn kind of we need to cut taxes.
But there was also a specific homework assignment that every member of that committee got from their chairman. And that followed a really interesting comment from Representative Del Raybolds, who said, you know, what is broke here? I don't like to take a piece of equipment out in the shop and start working on it unless I know it's broken. What is broken with our state tax commission, our state tax system? And so every legislator was assigned to come back and say what they think needs some fixing. And we'll hear that at their next meeting next week, now that all their meetings are open.
One quick question. This is a working group. Will they at some point be taking public testimony, or because it's a working group, it's more informal and it's more of a discussion among the members? Or?
Actually, Senator Sidaway indicated that they do intend to take public testimony at some point. It hasn't been specifically laid out, and this this group's power really is just in making a recommendation to the legislature. It's what they say won't necessarily go, but it carries weight because it's bringing together both houses prior to the session, whereas during the legislative session, all tax legislation starts in the House and it doesn't hit the Senate till late, and the result in recent years has been nothing happens.
And in that sense, it's more powerful really than interim committees, where you have a mismatch between the members of the interim committee and the germane committees to which they report, when you have the tax committees represented on this working group.
Could be, yeah, definitely.
Well, with all of that in mind, I'm going to pivot on a slightly related note. We mentioned that Jeff Sayer is on his way out, and he's not the only person from the Otter administration who has announced that he or she is leaving this year or in the last year. I'm thinking Department of Corrections, I'm thinking Department of Insurance, Department of Administration, the list goes on, DEQ. Is this a symptom of things going wrong at the Otter administration, or is it more a symptom of Otter has been in office for going on 9 years now, and people are retiring?
I think that's certainly a part of it. I mean, you look at the Department of Insurance. Bill Dill had been there for quite some time. He retired. The new director, Dean Cameron, is coming from the legislature. Same is true with the new director at DEQ, former Senator John Tippett. And so they've got a history with the legislature, and now they're in the administration. In some ways, that might ease the relationship between the Otter administration and the legislature. I don't know. We'll see.
How do you see it, Jim?
Well, it'd be interesting. Their legislative experience is important. The question is in terms of their administrative experience and being the heads of these various agencies. As far as people leaving, I think it's probably natural in many respects. This is, as you pointed out, we're into the third term of the Otter administration, and many of these people serving in government aren't always comfortable working for government for a great period of time, and it's time to move on for a number of them.
We're just talking about the ones who are leaving voluntarily. There have been a couple that didn't, right?
Well, technically, and we spoke to Otter about this, he says he never fires anybody.
Right.
So we'll leave it at that.
Are you disclosing something here?
It's all been reported.
It's all been reported.
All right, thanks. So I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you again to Bill Dentzer from the Idaho Statesman, Dr. Jim Weatherby, and Betsy Russell from the Spokesman-Review. And until next time, good night.
Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.